My name's Cathy Gillespie and I was injured in a motorcycle accident in Morocco.
John Taylor, I'm husband of Cathy. The tour was for, I think, 2 weeks. Riding two up on a motorcycle, Cathy was on the back. It went down as we started to turn for a corner. I wasn't injured, but unfortunately, Cathy bumped her head. Cathy's helmet wasn't even damaged.
I did anything had gone wrong because everything felt normal. I was talking to people normally. I didn't feel dizzy or anything like that. But there was no ill effects whatsoever. So it's really hard to say what was going on because I didn't know. As far as I was concerned, I was fine.
On the second day following the accident, we were checking in, and that was the first time I noticed anything slightly wrong. Cathy seemed to slow down a little bit and be a little bit confused getting the passports out and was quite red in the face. And the eye surgeon friend of ours that was with us felt it was the classic signs of heat stroke. I then escorted Cathy to our room where she lay down and we let her sleep it off. I came back about an hour later in the room and she was snoring. So I assumed that she was sleeping it off and I thought there was no issues. As I went in, I tried to just wake her, rouse her. There was no response at all. But the unusual thing was, not only was she cold to the touch, but she was also rigid. When I tried to move her arm, it just wouldn't move. And I got very worried at that stage. I called in our friend, the eye surgeon, and Jeffrey, who was a nurse at the Royal London Hospital. Very fortunately, he was with our group. He came in as well. They noticed her pupils were not equal, and her eyes were slightly splayed, and they were very concerned. We called for an ambulance. It was 3 hours in total between getting people to us, getting back to the town, and then moving on to the bigger city. The surgeon came and introduced himself to me and said they would need to carry out a CT scan. A CT scan took place, and then the surgeon, and I can't praise the surgeon enough. He showed me the CT scan. He showed me the bleeding on the right side, which surprised me. I was confused at first, but I didn't realise that when you have an impact on one side, the damage is usually done on the other side. But he showed me and told me what needed to be done, a craniotomy, and asked for permission to carry that out. Obviously, there was no doubt there. And I was then told, leave everything to him, come back the next day, and he would be there at 10 in the morning. And so that's exactly what I did. I was told the next day that Cathy was stable. I couldn't see her first of all in the morning. The operation had been from midnight till 3 a.m. But I saw her in the afternoon and she was being intubated. Her arms were tied to stop her dislodging any drips and so forth. And I could see some slight response, but not much. And then the next day I saw her in the morning again. The only people that would speak English were the surgeon and the anaesthetist. I then went back in the afternoon of the morning of the second day, and Cathy was speaking slightly, but she seemed to be not too a little bit confused about where she was. But in the afternoon, they'd taken the intubation out, and Cathy was able to communicate very, very slightly. But it was obvious she recognised who I was, which was a massive moment for me.
After the accident, I remember waking up in a strange bed with no clothes on, which I thought was very odd indeed. So I didn't remember anything before that. So I wasn't quite sure where I was, which hospital I was in, or presumably I was in hospital, probably in Morocco. But
the following day, we had arranged for her to be flown back to the UK. The hospital were prepared to release her, but all the arrangements were in place. Both this end, Jeffrey had liaised with the Royal London Hospital to get her a bed in here. and all the arrangements are in place, but the flight wouldn't. The medical evacuation company refused to take her, and so at the last minute the flight was cancelled. That caused a problem in the sense of the hospital were, I think, geared for her leaving then. So it was agreed they would put her in a room. So and then the next day the crew they arranged the flight, and it was 2 hours. We knew the flight was coming from Nuremberg, and the flight was due to land at 11 o'clock that day, and the surgeon came back in and asked me to see the administrator, the chief administrator. And then there was a strange argument between the administrator and myself with regard to releasing Cathy, because they wouldn't release Cathy until they'd been paid. And the problem with that was they wouldn't accept a credit card until I realised that the hospital doesn't even have a bank account. So it can't process credit cards, it can't process checks or anything. It only relies on cash. And I couldn't believe it when the bill came out. It was £280, which was just incredible, considering we had to get the materials for this when we arrived. One thing I didn't mention there, when we arrived, the surgeon couldn't carry out the operation until he had the materials. And therefore it was incumbent on us to go into the city to buy the materials he needed to carry out the operation. Now, these materials were £111, and yet the entire stay at the hospital, the surgery and everything else was only £280. Yeah, it just didn't make any sense.
The first time I heard about the brain injury would be when I woke up here and there were all the people around the bottom of the bed saying, "Do you remember who I am?" and all that sort of thing. And I had no idea why I was here, so we had to start piecing it together. It was a bit like a jigsaw, you know. So people would say one piece of information and you gradually sort of marry it up with something else. So that was a bit weird because nothing made any sense at first. You sort of woke up thinking, why am I here? You know, it's all very bizarre. Because I didn't really feel anything after the accident, even though I banged my head. I hadn't sort of related that to anything that happened afterwards, so it didn't seem that that was the reason why I was in hospital, because it was so minor to me that it didn't make any, you know, it didn't sort of translate into something major. So it's hard to say. And actually you start piecing things together, like if your brain's been injured, then obviously these things wouldn't work properly. And eventually they'll come back, you hope. So
the rate of change at the beginning was dramatic. There was massive change. And then it's gradually tapered off as she starts to come back to normality. I think probably the thing that I would take away from this is the advice that Jeffrey, the nurse from the Royal London Hospital that was travelling with us, told me out there. This is going to be a long journey. Don't expect any sudden recoveries. And he was preparing me in the early stages for what was going to come next. But if anybody had told me at the start, somebody with a brain injury, I would assume somebody that is severely impaired. But I'm amazed how many people make a full recovery, and you just don't know until time passes and you see the results for yourself.
In a dark room we fight, make up for our love. I've been thinking about you, about us.